distinguished guests, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of GIC, Temasek, MAS, and EDB, I welcome all of you to the 5th Singapore Summit. Since our meeting last year, the world has become rather more unsettled and harder to predict. When DPM spoke last night, he talked about the gloom in the world and whether that is in fact justified. It was an interesting session, giving us a lot of food for thought overnight. This state of the world, the uncertainty, is the subject of our first plenary session this morning. The global economy remains sluggish. Sentiments against free trade are growing. The long-term yield curve has stayed unusually flat. A couple of months ago, Alan Greenspan spoke about possible stagflation. Possible stagflation in the US economy as unprecedented QE fails to spur productivity growth. He diagnosed the inability to roll back entitlements in mature economies as a key issue. Now, rolling back entitlements is fundamentally not an economic problem, but a political problem. Whether it is the US, Europe, or Japan, economic restructuring in the face of relentless technological change is politically difficult to achieve when elections are always around the corner. To create, one must first destroy, which was Joseph Schumpeter's great insight. Monetary policy should be to ease the process of creative destruction, not to keep postponing it. Too many failed enterprises are being artificially kept afloat by cheap money. Then, when change comes, as it must, instead of small shocks, we have big ones. The easy money of the last 8 years has also worsened wealth and income inequality in the world. Those who are able to access cheap money benefit, while the majority who cannot access cheap money stagnate. Something is not right when markets react nervously and wildly to the vague utterances of a handful of men and women in the world who control money supply, none of whom are elected. All this has contributed to the growing electoral unhappiness and political fragmentation that we see around us. Yesterday, Chancellor Merkel in Bratislava, at a meeting of the 27, saw a Europe in crisis. After lunch today, we have a special session on globalization and its new tensions, with particular attention to Brexit and the US presidential elections. We are fortunate to have Peter Mandelson, Jim Messina, and Matt Rhodes join us for a special view from our summits. What happens in Europe and the US impacts us hugely in Asia. Fortunately, Asia continues to do well. Although China's economy has slowed down, the process of political and economic reform continues under the tough leadership of President Xi Jinping. His determination to root out corruption in China since assuming leadership in 2013 is, by any measure, given the size and nature of China, astonishing. The shift from manufacturing to services and from investment-led growth to consumption-led growth is gradual but persistent, and one which is absolutely essential not only for China, but for Asia and the world. The 13th five-year plan, released in April this year, is worth careful reading. Barring cataclysmic disruption, China is on track to becoming the world's biggest economy by mid-century. After lunch, the third plenary session will be on China's One Belt, One Road initiative, which is one of the 5 pillars in the 13th five-year plan. The growing connectivity within Asia and between Asia and the rest of the world provides the basic infrastructure for the integration of Asian economies in the coming decades. This is happening gradually, sometimes in fits and starts, but it is happening on an epic scale. I was pleasantly surprised when my own company started transporting containers from China to Madrid by rail, and to find out just a few days ago that we'll soon be transporting containers from China to Gwadar in the Arabian Sea across the high Kunjarat Pass by rail and road. The Kunjarat Pass is 4,700 meters above sea level. This year's session on One Belt, One Road takes off from last year's special address by Jing Liqun on AIIB. Last year, India's Finance Minister, Arun Jaitley, addressed us. And he talked about GST. And since then, he has succeeded in getting both houses of the Indian Parliament to pass the constitutional amendment with unanimous support. This is a huge achievement and of historic importance. Implementation will take time, but GST will reduce interstate trade barriers in India and help keep the country on its momentum of growth, which has overtaken China in the last 2 years. By 2050, India could conceivably overtake the US as the world's second biggest economy. By that time, Indonesia may become the 4th biggest economy in the world in PPP terms. What is not in doubt is the progressive shift of the world's economic center of gravity to Asia. In the coming decades, the current slack in global demand will be taken up by the growth in Asian consumption as middle classes grow. In fact, the problem today is that this growth in consumption is not growing fast enough to take up the global slack. And if this gap cannot be bridged, then we could well have a financial crisis. The last plenary session today focuses on tomorrow's Asian consumers. Conditions now are flattish, we're in the doldrums, but if we raise our eyes further ahead, this consumption will create immense opportunities for everybody. Now, all this is only possible. This optimistic view of Asia's future is only possible provided there is no major conflict in the region. Disputes over the South China Sea just a few months ago sounded the alarm. But since then, the situation has calmed down. President Duterte of the Philippines is determined to take a different approach with China. Between China and Vietnam, recognizing their growing interdependence, both sides agreed just early this week during Vietnam Prime Minister Phoc's visit to Beijing to manage differences by friendly negotiations. Even though between foreign ministries, the rhetoric can sometimes be shrill, between the two communist parties, the relationship remains profound. Conflict in Northeast Asia may get worse, especially over North Korea. But I think, on the whole, we can be cautiously optimistic. It behooves neither the US nor China to have the situation get out of control. There is a trial of strength and occasional brinksmanship, which we must expect from time to time over the coming decades between the world's biggest power and the world's biggest emergent power. The fact is, China needs peace to develop economically. And in a completely different domain, between China and the Vatican, there are now hopeful signs of eventual reconciliation. Nevertheless, in economics, we must always expect political surprises. I was talking to Nick Gowen last night. Between Russia and the West, a major accident is waiting to happen. Whether loud or soft, geopolitics will be our background music at the Singapore Summit. We should end by 4:45 p.m. this afternoon so that you will have plenty of time for your own activities for the rest of the day. I hope many of you will be able to stay on for the F1 race. Please do let us have your feedback on our shortcomings and your recommendations for improvement. Your support of the Singapore Summit over the last 5 years has been most encouraging to us. For the plenary sessions, Chatham House rules apply. Please do not quote anyone by name without first seeking his permission. The other sessions are open to media coverage. I wish you an interesting day ahead and a pleasant weekend in Singapore. Thank you.